All right, students, I'm going to be talking with you about the late Republic today. And the dates for the late Republic are 133 through 31 BCE. Okay. I wanted to clarify on the Middle Republic video. Um, the Middle Republic dates are 287. That is the starting point. I believe that I may have misspoke in our last lecture and mentioned the starting date of the Punic Wars, 264 is that date. So just want a clarification on that. And that's where I started talking in that lecture too. So just a few years difference there. And the Middle Republic is really just occupied by the Punic Wars. But just want to make that clarification for people following along. Um, Again, the dates are 133 to 31 BCE for the late Republic, and we'll be discussing the first portion of this period during this presentation. Okay, so after 350 years of Roman Republican expansion, there's a lot of domestic and foreign unrest that is going to plague the late Republican period. Okay. Now, why and how does the republic collapse? We're going to talk about some things, and then we'll go into discussing people and move out from there. But there was a century of warfare that weighed heavily on the ordinary people of Italy in a lot of ways. Okay, Romans and allied peasants had farms ruined while they were fighting. And the Roman elite were bitterly divided over what to do about problems of the peasants. Right, one faction wants to redistribute land for the peasants, while another has just zero sympathies for disenfranchised folks. So by the late Republic, the city of Rome is crowded, likely had reached 1 million inhabitants. This forces the government to take charge of the grain supply. And ambitious nobles are no longer willing to subordinate themselves to the community during the late Republic. In the same sort of compromises that we had seen in the early and middle Republican periods. Competing armies and land-hungry peasants are both marching across Italy. In this late Republic, this is a time of reformers and revolutionaries. In Rome, military service was a prestigious activity, so there was a property qualification imposed, and that means that poor people are not going to be drafted. Now, in the 2nd century, it becomes necessary to reduce the property qualification several times. And if the free peasantry continues to decline, Rome is either going to have to drop the property qualification altogether or stop fielding armies. Okay, so let's start talking about the Gracchi brothers, right? These are going to be some reformers, and then we're going to move on. We're going to talk about two commanders, two military personalities from the late Republic. Now, let's talk about the Gracchi. All right, 133 to 21 BCE will be the time period I'm talking about. I talk about two different brothers. First off is Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. He's one of 10 tribunes for the year 133 BCE. He's the son of Cornelia, and his father is a distinguished general and ambassador, also named Tiberius. Now, Tiberius Gracchus, he becomes a spokesperson for a group of prominent senators who backed this land reform issue to restore Rome's peasant soldiers. Now, since a man had to meet this certain property qualification to serve in the Roman army, the available pool of citizens is shrinking along with the wealth of the average citizen. Gracchus saw that the army could be strengthened and more Romans could qualify for citizenship. He proposed to close the growing rift between rich and poor by instituting major reforms, including the redistribution of property for populist and practical reasons. He pointed out that men who fought and died for Rome enjoyed only air and light and no dens of repose or refuge. He proposed that there should be roughly a 320-acre limit to the amount of public land a person could own, with an exception of 667 acres for a man with 2 sons. The wealthy would not be able to buy back land that was redistributed. and the former landowners would be reimbursed for improvements that they had made while owning it. Now, most senators stood to lose from this legislation that Gracchus is proposing and accused him of being a demagogue who had his sights set on a dictatorship. Dictatorship is something we're going to be talking about moving forward quite a bit, but not in the same sense that when we talked about Cincinnatus. Now, Tiberius broke custom by running for a second consecutive term as tribune. And while the tribal assembly is preparing to vote on new tribunes, a group of senators who opposed Gracchus led a mob to the forum, had Tiberius and 300 of his followers clubbed to death. This event is the first time in the Republic that a political debate was settled by bloodshed inside of Rome itself. Tiberius's killers had attacked the traditional inviolability of the tribunes, and this is what is really setting the stage for the next 100 years of this period being one of violence and of violence being used politically as a weapon in politics to achieve goals that the elite have for the Republic. Now, 10 years later, Tiberius's younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, became tribune himself in 123 BCE and renewed his older brother's proposals. Now, some land reforms from Tiberius had actually been enacted by the Senate after his assassination. Now, Gaius expanded his brother's coalition, adding to its supporters from the equestrian order and the urban populace, which was mainly composed of slaves and freedmen. Gaius wanted to stabilize the price of grain and give the plebs or the plebeians cheap grain at subsidized prices. He also wanted to check the abuses of senators by giving the equestrians greater powers. Okay, so the equestrians are wealthy landowners, similar to senators in most respects socially, but they failed to have reached the Senate, but they yearned for that type of political power. Gaius sponsored the extension of his brother's agrarian law, new colonies, public works, and relief for Rome's poor soldiers. He also proposed to extend full Roman citizenship to allied states of Italy, some of them. This would have created a new citizen base for collective power, which could challenge Rome's senatorial elites that we keep discussing. Now, a riot by his supporters, Gaius's supporters, led the Senate to pass a declaration of public emergency, empowering officials to use any means necessary to protect the state. One of the consuls had Gaius and 250 of his followers killed. Another 3,000 Gracchis were executed soon thereafter in a very violent political purge. Now, the Gracchian Land Commission did give land to approximately 75,000 citizens. The law, however, was amended to permit the resale of redistributed land, and the commission itself was abolished following this event. The senatorial oligarchy is certainly in control, and the Republic's constitution had been corrupted by a wealthy elite by the late Republic, is what we're seeing here. Roman politics is a very unstable brew. In time, it became clear that the Gracchi had divided the political community into two loose groupings. The optimates, the best people, these are conservatives who asserted the rule of the Senate against popular tribunes and the maintenance of the estates of the wealthy in spite of the agrarian crisis. And also the second grouping would be the populares. They were on the other side. These are the men of the people who challenged the rule of the Senate in the name of relief of the poor. Now, the populares were not Democrats. They were Roman nobles who believed in hierarchy, but like the Gracchi, they advocated for redistribution of wealth and power as a way of restoring stability and strengthening the military. Now, by 100 BCE, Rome's agrarian crisis had become a full-scale military crisis due to the things that we've been discussing. Now, let's talk about two individuals that are going to kind of set a precedent for the Republic, right? So, and this is going to be Marius and Sulla. All right, so I'm going to be talking about the years 107 through 78 BCE here. Now, an equestrian and Roman general named Gaius Marius, his dates are 157 to 87 BCE, and he had fought in a successful campaign against the king of Jugurtha of Numidia, a small kingdom in North Africa. That is one of the early places that he begins to win some notoriety. In 107 BCE, he is elected to the office of consul, an office that he would hold 6 more times throughout the course of his career. Now, Marius shows how army command could be an alternative path to political power. And this sets an important precedent because it showed that a man with no family connections or political experience could override opposition from older political elites that we've been discussing, who are kind of controlling the balance of society, and he could basically use his army to intimidate those same elites. So it becomes this sort of military, senatorial, sort of like they're basically intimidating one another, right? The Senate has all this power and they're elite, but you get a powerful commander who's also involved in politics. His army's very loyal to him. It becomes this unstable brew that I mentioned a minute ago. Now, Marius proved to be a military reformer and a popularis. He streamlined, reorganized, strengthened, and expanded the Roman army. Here's some things he did. He abolished the property qualification that had limited military service to citizens. Now the potential pool of soldiers included the urban poor and landless peasants. Roman soldiers were no longer peasants doing part-time military service, but rather landless men making a profession of the military. A career as a Roman legionnaire became an end in itself rather than a routine service to the state. So a soldier's loyalty gets redirected towards its commander, people like Marius, whose success would win rewards for his men. Marius made soldiers carry their own equipment. He reorganized and combined larger units from subunits of the legion into something called cohorts, which rendered the army firmer and more cohesive. And politically, Marius became a force to be reckoned with. Now, Marius was an indispensable general and demanded and won an unprecedented 7 elections to the consulship, most of them in violation of law, requiring 10 years between each consulship. There's going to be 2 new wars that are going to weaken the Roman Republic. Italian allies rose against Rome in a bloody and bitter struggle from 91 to 89 BCE, known as the Social War. The allies fought hard, and Rome, in order to prevail, had to concede to them what they had demanded at the onset, which was full Roman citizenship. The second conflict pitted Rome against the Mithridates or Mithridates. It's spelled Mithridates. This I've heard it Mithridates or Mithridates. I've heard it pronounced both ways, and I'm not sure which one is correct. But there's a rebellious king in northern Anatolia who has a lot of great ambitions. And once against a military man rose from Rome to sort of address this issue. This would be Marius's former lieutenant, okay? And he served as consul for the year 88 BCE. And this is going to be Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix, or just Sulla. Sola or Sulla. Sola is going to be the pronunciation you hear me say mostly, okay? So let's talk about Sola. Sola was an aristocratic general who served consul again in the year 88 BCE. Now, Marius forced the Senate to deny Sulla's claim to lead Rome's army in Anatolia. And when Sulla was denied command, he marched into Rome with his army, and Marius seized control of the city with his own legions. Okay. Marius died soon after this, and the aristocracy appointed Sola as dictator, but not for the traditional 6 months. His term had no limits, and he used his powers to exterminate his opponents and pack the Senate with people which were loyal to him. Sola was ambitious, just as ambitious as Marius. He was a patrician and an optimate. The two became deadly rivals for a time, and the two men's troops fought over the issue of command in Anatolia. Sola does end up going to Anatolia, defeats the Mithridates, and returns to Italy in 83 BCE, and then engages in an all-out civil war. Sola defeated Marius' men in battle, excluding Marius himself, who had died in 86 BCE. He sealed the victory by executing his political opponents, as many as 2,000 of them. Their land was confiscated and sold to Sola's friends, and Sola confiscated land of any Italian community that opposed him and gave it to his veterans, about 80,000. Having assumed the long dormant office of dictator, but without a true time limit of his tenure, Sola attempted to restore the senatorial rule to the pre-Graccan days. He greatly weakened the tribunes and strengthened the Senate, doubling their size to nearly 600 senators. He returned in 79 BCE and dies 1 year later. And the populares soon gained enough strength to restore the old powers of the tribunes after this. Many senators aspiring to what Sola had done, not what he had said, pursued personal power to the collective interest of the state. Okay, that is all that we're going to be lecturing over for this discussion, but look back for another talk over Julius Caesar and Pompey. Going to be getting into the collapse of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire with Caesar Augustus. All right. Thank you for listening. Let me know if you have any questions.